Okay, so hello and welcome to another episode of Grief Unedited. This is a space where we have real and honest and raw conversations about grief and loss. I'm your host, Karen Lafferty, and I'm an accredited counsellor specialising in grief, and I've worked with people for over a decade now, helping them to navigate their journey through loss. If you want to connect with me, I am on Facebook and Instagram, and both of those are at Continuum Counselling, or you can also find me on my website, which is www.continuumcounselling.com. Just to start, I want to acknowledge that this podcast is just purely for educational purposes. It shouldn't replace support, and any views that I express are my own, and they don't represent the thoughts of any third parties that I work either on behalf of or with. And lastly, just a bit of a content warning, really. These conversations are real, they are unedited, so there's no filters or fancy gadgets in it. And it's just about making sure that we use our own discretion when we're listening. So if any of today's content feels triggering for you, just please do look after yourself. You can feel free to either step away from the episodes, come back later on when you might feel in a space to listen. I'm a great believer that we can listen and trust our own wisdom when it comes to things like this, so please just make sure that you look after yourself as you join our conversation. And today I'm delighted. I am joined by the lovely Kat Patterson. And Kat, I'm going to let you introduce yourself in a wee second as well, just to tell us a wee bit about who you are. But today we're going to talk a wee bit about anticipatory grief. So once we've found out a wee bit about you, we're going to just set the scene today, which is a wee bit different to how our previous episodes have worked. But we're just conscious that this might be language that people, I suppose, maybe haven't come across before as well. So we'll do a wee bit of that too before we dive into today's episode. So, Kat, tell us a wee bit about yourself. Yeah, what do you want folk to know about you?
First and foremost, Karen. So, Kat Patterson, I'm a coach. I work with women leaders who are ready for epic grace, a bit of gumption, and I love helping them craft in a life or career or business that fits them like the perfect pair of jeans, because we all know how hard it is to buy a pair of jeans. And it's really about quietening down that unhinged emotional backseat driver in our lives that kind of tends to run the show at times, and rediscovering that maybe you like yourself more than you think you do. So that's kind of what I do in a nutshell, effectively, is just working with people to help them like themselves again.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. And so we're talking today about anticipatory grief. So I suppose just to kind of set the context of what that is, and Kat and I were just having a quick chat before we hit record about the sense that this might be something that feels familiar for people, but maybe don't have the language or haven't recognised it as being so. So when we're talking about anticipatory grief, ultimately what we're talking about is the sense of grief and loss that often people experience before the person that they're grieving has died. So for lots of people, that'll come round about the time of a diagnosis. It's quite well documented that when people have a life-changing diagnosis, whether that's a terminal diagnosis or just something that's going to significantly alter the quality of somebody's life, it's likely that there will be an expression of grief at that stage. And again, I think we'll probably get into this in our conversation as well. But I think one thing I want to just say from the beginning is that it doesn't then result in any less grief when the person dies. It's not like we've done our grieving and we don't feel sad then when it happens. But yeah, I think sometimes people feel surprised or, they're not expecting it to feel quite as like grief as it does. So yeah, that's ultimately what we're kind of starting to touch into in today's conversation.
Absolutely. I think it's just, as you say, it's you've maybe not used the language to explain how you're feeling, or maybe you've been feeling a certain way and not had words to articulate
Mm.
what it is that you've been experiencing. So I think it's a good conversation today. I'm hoping it's a good conversation and useful for people to take something away from it that's positive, and that they can, even at the very least, understand what they're experiencing.
Mm. So give us a bit of context then. What's been your experience? What are we talking about today when we're talking about anticipatory grief then?
So grief for me has been a bit of a constant companion for the last 7 or 8 years. My mum has Alzheimer's.
Okay.
So it's not it, and just as you said, it's the anticipation of losing that person. Also, you're in it because every single day you lose a person because they've lost their memory of you, they've lost the memory of themselves, and also you lose that connection. So whilst you know that you're going through that with a person, they're not aware of it.
Yeah.
And it's a change in their personality, your shared history disappears, and it's that gradual kind of drip away in terms of that experience, if that makes sense, with my mum. So having to actually get to know her as a completely different person
Wow.
is kind of part of that, I would
Mm.
say. And I'm going to be honest, when we first got a diagnosis and she turned into a different person, she went from the calmest person in the world to a very angry person.
Mm.
Her personality changed. That was really hard to get to know that person. A person who would never have commented or been past remarkable, suddenly making the most inappropriate gestures about other people in the care home, you know.
Gosh, right, okay.
So yeah, so it's a really weird mix of losing the person whilst they're sitting in front of you, but also losing the connection with them as they lose themselves.
Mm-hmm. And what was your relationship like with your mum kind of prior to her diagnosis? Were you guys close? Like what was, yeah.
Yeah, we were really close, and we had lovely, I've got lovely memories of booking away weekends with her when I was a bit older, probably into my 20s. Getting to spend weekends away with her. We would go to Bath and we would go to Oxford and we would do a wee bus kind of tour or something. Leave my dad to watch the football at home. And it was just a lovely, close relationship. And I think that's one of the things that feels like a real heavy burden in this grieving process, because when something exciting happens or something sad happens, kind of always want to go and tell my mum.
Mm.
And it's really weird because she's still there, you know. So she's sitting in a world at the moment where she's non-verbal. She's not known who we are. I've got a couple of brothers for the last 6, 7 years. And but oh goodness, I just talk at her now. If you had to get a chance to kind of respond to me, but I just talk at her and tell her all my news, but it's really hard
Oh,
not having the person that you would share that with
yeah,
have a
yeah. Gosh,
response. Yeah.
I can feel
Like
that just as you're saying that. Yeah, do you know, just that sense of like she's very much still there, but she's
yeah.
not there as well. She's not your mum in the way that you know your mum anymore.
Yeah, you can actually feel a bit of your brain pulling apart, like when
Mm.
you're in that, because you're thinking you're there, I can see you, and I can have a conversation. Well, I can't. It's a one-sided conversation that you want to share, but there's nothing back, and
Mm.
it's hard.
Yeah. At what point or when did it first kind of occur to you that what you were experiencing in that cat was grief? Like, can you remember the moment that your brain went, ah, right, okay, this is what this is?
I think it took me quite a long time actually, because again, I didn't have the language, and I stumbled across it with an Instagram post. I think it was called the Grieving Room, and I thought, oh, crikey, that's what I've experienced, because my dad passed 3 years ago.
Ah, okay.
So, and my dad passed on the day of my mum's 80th birthday. He was ready to go and take his birthday card, and he had his suit all laid out. He was like, man, that dressed well. And when my dad passed, I thought it was grief. That grief was really overwhelming. And it wasn't until probably 6 months into that grief for my dad passing that I thought, there's something else going on here.
Mm.
Because it didn't feel like just normal grief. Not that there's normal grief, but in my head, I thought, well, I was trying to rationalize it. So that was what, 2.5 years ago. It's taken me to find the language to really understand it. And I think labels are one of those things that can be really detrimental, but they can be really useful sometimes. And I think as soon as I got that label of anticipatory grief, it's like a light bulb went off. And I gave myself a bit more grace and a bit more
Oh.
permission
Mm.
to just be in it,
Yeah. Yeah.
not fight it and not try to solve it and fix it because you can't fix it. So actually just the permission to sit in it and go, that's okay, because today's a better day or today's not a great day.
Mm.
And it allows me to then show up for my mum and be there for her while I've still got time with her.
I think that's such a useful thing, though, that sense of like, I get what you're saying, like sometimes labels aren't helpful, do you know, and it can cause a bit of stigma or pressure in people. But actually, when you can recognise grief as grief, you know, it's like you've been grieving all of that time, but maybe didn't recognise it's that, not have the name to put to it, not be able to give yourself that permission in that space. So actually, the acknowledgement of that's why this is feeling so difficult. That's why life is feeling so heavy at times as well.
I think as women, we're really good at just soldiering on.
Yeah.
Be because of this, or it'll be menopause, or it'll be perimenopause, or it'll be because I've got a lot on my plate. But actually, it just gives me so much permission to know all my energy's low today because I've gone in to see her. And it's always hard coming away, because you never know what you're leaving, you never know what you're getting into, and it's another wee bit's gone, or you're waiting on that phone call of she's passed. So yeah, you'd be forgiven for having a nap in the afternoon.
Mm.
And we can't always hold it all together all the time, and that's okay.
Have you found then, or have you got things that you do differently now that you've got that awareness? Like, have you changed how you navigate the day-to-day stuff? Because I'm just conscious that from what you're describing, it's like, gosh, you're seeing your mum, you're spending time with her, you're still around her, but it feels like to be doing that, there must then be fallout from it in some way.
And I think I laugh. I'm well known for kind of, being under a blanket most of the time doing my work and, cuddled up with the cats, and husband bringing me tea on tap. But actually, it's a fundamental part of how I nurture myself. I need them, to use the Scottish phrase, getting a wee dwam sometimes
Mm.
and just stare at a wall.
Yep.
But before that might have just been something I do now. It's actually quite an intentional thing to recharge the batteries to go again. And I think the other thing I've found, and this is, I was just reflecting on it before we were going to have this conversation, which was really cathartic. Um, One of the things I do intentionally is I know that I want to isolate. So I know that I want to hide sometimes from it, and I don't really want to talk about it. Actually, that's when I need to connect with people. But what I tend to do is connect with people who don't really know me that well.
Ah, right, okay.
Because sometimes the people that know you that well want to try and fix it. And when you connect with people who kind of know you but aren't really in the thick of it,
Mm.
they don't ask you too many difficult questions. They give you a little glimmer of hope that there's something beyond this grief about who I am.
Yeah.
I'm not just this grief. I'm not just this part of this chapter. It's something more. So it feels like an counterintuitive thing to go and be around people that don't actually know me. So it's almost like hiding in plain sight.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, and I intentionally do that.
I think that's such a useful thing, and I often find myself talking to people about the idea of like, be strategic with who you take your energy to, do you know, because there's some people that are the deep and meaningful people in your world and you want to sit down and have the big conversations with them. But then there's the other people that, I have friends that really we only see each other in social circumstances, we're quite light in our conversations. We don't do the big, deep, meaningful things. So I know that if I'm feeling low, if I'm in a bit of a funk, then actually they're the go-to people for me because they just lift you back out of that heaviness of whatever it is that's going on. So yeah, being quite strategic and like, right, who do I need to be around at the minute to lift you or to support you or to just give you permission to not have to talk about it, I suppose, as well.
One of the most difficult questions I get asked is, "Who's your mum?"
Mm,
And on a good day I can cope with that. On a bad day, it manifests as anger,
yeah.
and I don't want to be that person. But I'm thinking, well, she's got Alzheimer's and she's going to pass. Nothing is going to get better here. And I wonder if one of the tips that I've given to some of my friends that I've met and talked about it who are in a similar experience is ask that person how they are.
Mm-hmm. Not how's your mum?
Yeah, because that's not going to change. And again, it's coming from a place of love and genuine care because people, it's the same conversations when, you hear somebody passing and they say, oh, they're in a better place. And you're thinking, I am not ready for that. It's that kind of triggering. So actually, if we can change that question for somebody and say, how are you doing?
Mm.
How are how's your family coping with the situation? How are your siblings, if you know anything about them? And that's a much more useful question
And
to
much more
answer. with
Yeah,
how
much more answerable as well is the other thing. It's like, because as you say, like when you ask that big question of like, how's your mum? It's like, well, where do you even start with that?
yeah, and I've tried to, and I think as well, I've been brought up very much, you don't lie to people. But
Mm,
to feel in that quandary of, oh, I really want to tell the truth, but also that's not the place to do this, or I'm not in a place that I want to process that conversation today. If somebody said, how are you? And I was able to just go, actually, today's a bit rubbish, and leave it at that, or allow you to go deeper if you feel that it's the right conversation, the right time to do that. Or sometimes you can just go, do you know what? Today's a good day.
mm,
It gives you more, I think, um, avenues to maybe lift yourself back out of it. But that quite, and it's a really interesting. I respond to it in such different ways sometimes, depending on who's asked it or what day I've had with them. So apologies to anybody who's been on the receiving end of that quite nippy me going, dear,
mm,
it's not intentional. It's
mm.
just in the moment. It's overwhelming, and that's what it looks like to people on the outside.
That's really interesting because I'm sitting just reflecting on the idea that I suppose often one of the pieces of advice that comes out when people are kind of in the space of like they know somebody's recently experienced a loss, somebody's just very recently died, and they want to ask the person how are they doing, you know, and often one of the bits of advice that comes out is like to say the deceased person's name, to ask them about like, you know, how are they, you know, just to be able to bring the person's name into the conversation can sometimes be quite cathartic, but it's almost like when you're in this pre-bereavement anticipatory space, if you know the situation's likely to be unchanging, then actually it can be more difficult than beneficial to be like, oh, so how's your mum doing? You know, it's like as you say, same as she was the day before, same as she's likely to be tomorrow.
Yeah. Coming from a place of genuine love and care, that people are genuinely interested. I think we ask that question because actually what they want to know is how are you doing? How are you
Mm,
coping with it? And it's okay to ask that question, but certainly to me. And
mm,
I suppose I would invite people to think about, if you're in a similar situation, what's the right question? Point people to it, because nobody's a mind reader.
yeah.
Do you know, help them understand. This would be a really useful question to ask me if you see me.
Mm, hmm hmm I'm
Don't
also,
names.
it just reminded me, I've got a friend who was going through a process that, yeah, it's her story to tell, but it just reminded me of a conversation we had where the situation was taking a long time.
Mm.
And I kept being curious about how she was getting on and if anything had moved and all the rest of it. And one of the days she was like, I'll tell you when something changes. And it was at the moment I kind of knocked the wind out of my wee bit because I was like, all right, okay, I didn't mean to pry. But it's like actually, yeah, trusting that you'll tell us if something changes. You'll let us know if there's something that, you know, your friends need to know about.
Yeah, it's not really no tension, isn't it? Because I mean, don't get me wrong, nobody asked me, but thinking, why is nobody asking me? There's no right or wrong way to do this. I think when you're just, if you can find a place to be really open with people and give them the tools to say, look, some days this is going to be good, some days this is going to be terrible, but it would be really nice if every so often you just ask me how I am,
Mm,
and I'll tell you honestly. And I get that that doesn't leave space for spontaneity, but sometimes people just, if they don't know what to say, because we're all learning. Nobody gives you a rule book. There's no rule book that when you become an adult, all this stuff just gets delivered to you. How good would that
mm.
be?
You know, if only.
And also, there's no right or wrong way to do it, and there's a right way on one day, and it might be wrong on another day. So I suppose it comes back to what you said at the very beginning of this. For anybody who's listening to this, it's be kind to yourself and do what you need to do for you to look
Mm,
after yourself, because it's a marathon
yeah.
and it is not a sprint. And that's the advice that runs through my head. It's, be in their world. If it's Alzheimer's or dementia or any form of that, be in their world. Don't drag them into yours, and be kind to yourself, because, and again, that isn't a throwaway statement, but it's a marathon. You're in this for a bit longer than you expect. We thought my mum would have passed by now, and my God, she's got the heart of an ox, this woman. I used to think it was my dad that I got my stubbornness and fieriness from, but it's clearly my mother. Everybody around her, all of her friends have already passed and everything, and she is still going with Alzheimer's and cancer and all sorts.
Super.
And it's maybe just as well she doesn't know.
Mm.
You know.
Yeah. How, you don't have to answer this if it doesn't feel okay, but I suppose I'm wondering, like, how do you manage that when you're in that space of, like, almost you've anticipated that she wouldn't be here by this point, you know, but actually she's still going strong. So how do you manage that when she's as poorly as she is, but equally she's, she's still here and she's still going?
Being honest, some days I don't.
Right.
Some days I don't. Some days it's too much.
Mm.
Yeah. And yeah, that's the honest answer to it. And other days I'm brutally honest about it. If someday, and again, maybe apologies to those people who've caught me off guard, where my response has been, I wish she would have passed already for her sake, not mine,
Yeah.
not my family. And me and my brothers have different views on that. Um, but yeah, so sometimes that's the brutal honesty of it for her sake, because what, as far as we can tell on the outside looking in, that's not life. You know, you've been existing for a long time now.
Yeah.
So certainly not any, there's certainly not any enrichment, despite she's well looked after, you know, in a care home, but she's been non-verbal for many, many years. She's literally locked in her own world as far as we know, because how can we possibly tell? But yeah, some days are good and some days it's too much.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's something that I hear often is, like, those things that don't feel okay to say out loud, you know, and those things that can feel really difficult to actually take ownership of. And I know sometimes when people come into my space and we're having sessions together, it's that sense of relief that sometimes comes through of, like, you know, they've been really, really poorly. They've not had the quality of life that you would have wanted them to have. And, you know, sometimes when the death then subsequently does come, it's like, is it all right to feel relieved? Is it all right that, you know, I'm not as upset as I thought I was going to be, or, you know, or actually I'm more upset than I thought I was going to be because I knew it was coming. So, yeah.
It's never gone through my head, and I'll not know until it happens. And I know I'm going to be devastated when she goes, but I also know that there's going to be tremendous relief
Mm,
for her sake,
yeah.
for hers, you know, because it's hard. It's hard showing up all the time when somebody hasn't known you for many, many years and you care for them deeply, and I, yeah, you you would love if they hadn't had to experience the end of their life that way, but
Yeah.
you can't change that. So yeah, I think there's going to be a real roller coaster mix of emotions at the tail end of this as well, whenever that kind of happens. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I guess though that, as much as what we were saying right at the start, like, it doesn't mean that although you've had this time to kind of get your head around your mum's diagnosis and the impact that it's had in her life and yours and your wider family, like, it is so true that it's not going to lessen that sense of grief afterwards. But I kind of wonder, from your perspective, has this time given you a bit of space to kind of get to know what grief looks like for you, I suppose? Like, if you kind of, do you feel you've got a sense of what helps you and what doesn't?
it's a really great question actually, and I think probably having lost my dad in amongst all of this, um, thinking about it now as you've asked me, this grief and that grief feel like two very different experiences.
Yeah.
And I think because my dad probably he passed very quickly from a heart attack in the middle of the night. So it was, you know, it's the classic, oh, you would all want to go that way. You go to your bed and you sleep and you don't wake up again. Um, so that felt a very different grief. This is, you have to say, this is, I would never wish this on anybody, this experience.
Mm.
Um, this is hard. This is harder than any other grief that I've ever experienced. Maybe that's the stage of my life I'm at. Maybe it's because it's my mum. You know, there's so many variables in there. So, but what I suppose it has done is given me a toolkit, you know, because one of the things I talk about in my own kind of work with women is ominous positivity.
Okay.
So that positivity, but with that dark edge. So I've got friends who have gone through cancer treatment, and people, you'll hear it, oh, you're really brave. And they're like, no, I'm not, because I don't have a choice.
Yeah.
So that ominous positivity, which for me is a real, I love the kind of tension between those two words.
Yeah.
But that's actually where I'm at. It's kind of like, well, my mum's got Alzheimer's. There's nothing I can do to change it, but I have no choice. I will find a way through this. Because I don't, what other choice have I got to do that?
Yeah.
So it's not about being brave. It's about dealing with the cards that you've dealt and looking after yourself, I suppose.
Yeah.
Is that ominous positivity? If that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I totally get what you're saying about the kind of tension between those two words and just how, yeah, how just they contrast against each other as well. And so something you said there, Kat, felt really useful about like the relational aspect to grief. Do you know that again? I think we don't get a textbook that tells us what grief is, do you know, but ultimately it's the severing of a relationship. So when I hear people like yourself who have had multiple losses, it's like, of course it feels different because your relationship you had to your dad was totally different to the relationship you have with your mum, do you know, and circumstance around the death is totally going to contribute to that too. But it's why I think sometimes people can be surprised by their grief response because actually they're anticipating they're going to feel one way because they've maybe lost somebody else in their world and they're like, right, it's fine, I know how to do grief, I've been here before. Then it's like, no, actually this experience is different. And it's like, well, it's a different person, it's a different relationship. You know, the qualities and things that they brought to your life are going to be so different to, you know, whoever that other person was. So like even for the most adept grief responder, you know, somebody that's done it 1,000 times before, it's like they're still going to be surprised because the relationship's still going to be unique to whoever the person is that they've loved and also where they are in their life as well at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I was brought up in a very Catholic household. So
Okay.
we were professional grievers. Do you know?
I love that.
We were, there was I remember, when I married my husband, and he had been brought up and he could not get his head in it. Why would you have an open casket in your house? Whereas we were kind of like, why? That was quite a normal thing. So we were professional grievers. So I would say the shift for me, interestingly, when I think back, my 20s and 30s, it was kind of just part and parcel, you just went about it and you cried a bit at the graveside and then you were done. But I now look back on that and know that I was bottling a lot of that. Whereas now I'm more inclined to let it out because it's part of the healing. And I know that, people always say, oh, time is a great healer. Time has got nothing to do with it. It will always come in waves. When you get a memory or a smell or a moment where you want to tell them something, all of those kind of things, as they kind of rush towards you. I think I'm more accepting now of it's okay and quite normal to feel that deep loss and sadness, and it's okay to sit in it.
Yeah.
And it's also okay to laugh, and it's also okay, as you say, to mention their name, because actually they're still part of your life and your whole tapestry of your story. So why would you not talk about them and mention their name? So I think I'm better at grief now than I was. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the other bit that often gets discounted though is like the role of adrenaline in those very early days as well, do you know? And yeah, I suppose sometimes people, like when you were describing that sense of like, right, the funeral's done, that's it, I've cried my tears, it's time to get back to work and do all the normal stuff again. And it's like, I quite often find that it's only after the funeral that people really get a sense of what their grief feels like because it's at that point that suddenly the adrenaline's worn off and all the practical stuff's kind of starting to dry up a wee bit and, there's some sort of semblance of normality coming back and then it's like, oh shit, actually I still have this really heavy weight of loss and it's not just going to go away.
And one of the things actually I've become known for, which is a weird thing in grief, I've become known for this in certain circles. So if somebody close to me passes away or a friend's parent, whoever passes, I never now send flowers when that person goes. What I do is I mark my diary for 3 or 4 weeks' time and then I send them flowers because by that point the adrenaline has dipped. All the flowers that they've been inundated with have died.
Yeah.
They've gone back to normality when everybody else has gone back to normality and they're still sitting going, why is everybody still going to the work? I've lost a really precious person. And I will send at that point a note or a card or flowers or something to say, do you know what? feels a bit crap, doesn't it?
Mm.
But it will get better. I promise you it will get better. So I always make a point of doing that after, because as you say, that flatness after is when it really kicks in.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my friends recently lost her husband, and I went into her house, and her front room was honestly like a florist's. Like it was just floor, every feasible surface that you could just set flowers on was covered, and it's like
Yeah,
it all comes from people who are well-meaning, but I suppose it just strikes me when you're saying that as well, that like whose need is that satisfying? Is it my need to make her know that, I'm thinking about her and she's doing all right, or is it actually a benefit to the person? And yeah, it feels like there's something really powerful about that couple of weeks down the line when the dust started to settle a wee bit, just that mention of, yeah, it is shit, but I'm here if you need
yeah,
me, but
yeah.
it
Because
will
I know
get
when my
better.
dad passed, I was actually overwhelmed. So again,
Yeah.
you're coming from you understand that people want to show that they care and they show that they love you and that they want to acknowledge it. But I actually got really overwhelmed because we ran out of vases. The house was literally filled with them. I've got two cats. So we were trying to not get them to eat the poisonous ones,
Oh,
and then you don't want to do anything like to put flowers in a room where you're thinking, I don't see them because they've taken the time to spend the money on that. So actually, it's really overwhelming, particularly when somebody's well known like that. So what I'm not saying is don't send flowers, folks, but
yeah.
what I'm saying is yeah, exactly that. Maybe think about the intention behind it. And I know that's something that's I've done kind of quietly, and I've started to share it over the years where people think that was just amazing, like that 3 or 4 week mark when everything's just died down, and it just helps to know that people still care. No,
Mm-hmm. 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 I'm going back a wee bit, but you said something really powerful earlier on, Kat, about like just the power of connection when you're navigating grief as well. So
mm.
has that, I know you said earlier on that that's something you intentionally kind of put yourself into when you feel yourself retreating. Like, have you found that you've naturally been drawn to some people, or how's that kind of shown up for you in your world?
So I mentioned that the connection with people who don't really know.
Yeah, don't really know you.
It sounds really strange. Um, it's it's been so powerful because again, people close to you want to fix things and they want you to feel better. It's not to do that, surface level connections don't care about you, but they're not as inclined to try and fix. They're more inclined to just listen and, as you say, maybe divert the conversation back onto holidays and fun things, and that wee reminder that you're a person beyond this experience and that
Mm,
you're actually quite fun to be around. you know, because I think grief can do some strange things. It can sometimes bring out the best in you. Some days it really brings out the worst in me, and I'm not pleasant to be around.
mm,
Um, because I'm conscious of other people thinking, oh, crikey, is she going to be too sad today, or is she going to be angry today? All of those things. I'm very aware of that. And sometimes it helps to just have that light touch where you get to go for lunch, you can talk about surface level things, or even the weather becomes really good at
yeah.
that, you know, because I think connection, whatever that looks like, it stops you feeling lonely and it stops you isolating, because I think we know that alone and lonely are two different things.
Yeah.
There's a time to be nurturing to yourself and to be alone and to look after yourself, and I do that really well. I don't do lonely very well. And that feels like, as soon as it feels like it's tipping into isolation, I'm like, right, even if it's a local business event, like a local network, I'm thinking, right, I'll book myself onto a wee event there. I get to go and listen. I don't even have to talk. I can just listen and be in it, surface level chat, and then leave again. And that's a few hours out of my day that's filled with that something else. And just to fill your head with something else that you're not having to think about that grief all the time.
Has your crossing my experience with maybe yours, but I'm thinking, has your work been useful for that? Because I'm very conscious that when I've had difficult times in my life, actually there's still a part of me that can always show up for my clients. I can always like, and actually I can come out of sessions as heavy as those might be, and we might shed tears in that space, but I can still come out of it with like, I don't know, like an energy, a gratitude, just feeling like my cup's been filled up in the time that I've been able to connect with people, and it takes me out of my stuff and into, being the. So does that resonate for you?
Totally, and I'm going to share something, so apologies, this might be quite triggering, but after my dad had passed, and a lot of people don't know this, so they might be hearing it for the first time who are even really close to me. I was really quite suicidal
Okay.
at the Christmas time after my father had passed. Nobody would have known. There's literally two people that knew about it, and I happened to be down south at the time, and a friend thankfully spotted it and took me home.
Wow.
So it was quite a powerful situation to be in. Um, Nobody would have known. I had clients. I carried on. Even after the day my father passed, I was interviewing. I was helping an organisation interview, and I messaged the CEO to say, just to let you know, my father's passed. I'm still going to be there. They were having all kinds of kittens, and I said, look, I'm policing this for myself. This is not. If I felt I couldn't do that, I would absolutely not show up. This is for me. I'm going to do this for me because I can show up.
Yeah.
Nobody will know. I said, we can go on a Zoom call 15 minutes early. You can head tilt me if you like. And then we get on with the conversation. And then after that, you will not see me for X number of weeks because I know that that's useful for me. I think what I also am worried about sometimes when I do that, because that works for me, because I can compartmentalize really well. That's not to say that I expect other people to do that in circumstances. It's kind of, you need to do what's right for you. And if you need to go and hide and hunker down and look after yourself, but like you, I'm thinking, nope, I can show up, I can put the face on, and actually it's for me, it's not for anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Do what's right for you, that's not right for everybody.
Yeah, yeah, and I know that that's something you hear often said. It's like grief is individual, and it is absolutely. But I think the second part that needs to go with that is like you need to have permission to make choices and advocate for yourself as to what you need. And
Yeah.
for some folk, they need to be out and about and speaking to people and surrounded by folk. I was just speaking to my friend Mandy that we recorded an episode earlier today, and she was saying actually for her there was a real power in just having space on her own and not having folk on her doorstep every day, that gave her permission and time to look after herself. So, I genuinely think it's one of the few times in life where like something quite catastrophic has happened and yet there isn't a guidebook or a rule book or a helpful crib sheet of like here's how to get through this. It's like it really is trial and error of what do you need and how do you get that for yourself? Or if you can't do that, who have you got in your world that can advocate for you, that can be, as you said, there was a friend in your life that knew you well enough to spot that you really weren't okay in that moment and to intervene. So it's like who do you have around you that can be that sense checker, I suppose?
And I think there's something really powerful in that. And even if you don't know how you're going to deal with grief, just take a pause, take a beat, because everybody's always going to need you or want to do the right thing, or they're showing up for work. People are always going to want to make sure, are you okay to do that? And sometimes you might think you're making that choice for yourself, but you're still feeling beholden to somebody else. Just take a pause and sit in your gut and go, actually, I just want to pull a duvet over my head and cry. Thanks very much today.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But be really clear about that for yourself, because you're right. You've all got your own individual way and experience, and sometimes we think we know what we want and need in that moment, but if we don't give ourselves just that space and pause to reflect on it, just take a beat.
Take a beat. Right. Yeah. And I guess there's also like, there's taking the space to kind of figure out what you need, but there's also something about like when you're really in it, being able to actually say no to stuff as well. And again, I find myself often saying to people, like, this is one of the few times in your world where actually you have absolute permission just to say no to stuff or to be a bit flaky or to say to people, I might come, but I might not come, because we all hold ourselves to these really impossible standards of like having to show up for everybody else. And it's like when we're in the trenches of grief, it's one of the few times where hopefully the people around about us are decent enough to recognise that we might not be able to show up in the way we usually do. We might say yes and then drop out at the last minute, or we might go for half an hour and then leave. But it's like actually use that to your advantage and yeah, find comfort in whatever form that might come in.
always encouraging. I know it's really hard to do, but give people the toolkit to do that and recognise that. So we're not mind readers. So I've got a group of friends where I say, if I go AWOL and radio silence, it's fine.
Mm.
I will come back and I'll message in the WhatsApp group when I'm back on track again.
Yeah.
And exactly that, I'll come for half an hour. I just find it's easier for people to deal with when you give them the tools to see what's going on rather than thinking, crikey, that's not like her, or should we check in on her? Oh, you know, and you know there's a separate WhatsApp chat happening.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Which is all coming from a place of love and care. But I think maybe I've just reached the age where I'm just like, I'm just going to give you the toolkit so that you know exactly, and we have an understanding that they can do that too, so that we understand what's going on for people.
Mm-hmm. Have you any other pearls of wisdom that you've collected in this journey? Then anything else that's felt helpful? Any bits that have been really unhelpful that you've just been like, oh, never again?
I'm not so sure there's any more pearls of wisdom because I think, and I hope that anybody who listens to this conversation, there's some little key nuggets that might
Oh,
work
absolutely.
for them. I suppose just a reminder that grief is pretty messy. It's non-linear. There's always a way to find some form of connection and comfort if you look for it, but you need to look for it.
Yeah. Thank you for not just sharing your experience, because I think like experience is helpful because it maybe gives people, a nudge in the right direction, or it might give them the opportunity to go, well, I might try that, or you know what, maybe I do need to get out of my comfort zone a wee bit and, connect with some people, but also sharing a bit of like what's been going on for you behind the scenes of it all, because again, there'll be people out there that have felt that way too. There'll be people out there that don't have, the friends that you've had in your world that, might be struggling at this point. So I guess my feeling always would be, if you're feeling that way, if you're feeling not just suicidal, but if you're just feeling really bogged down in grief, which again it can do at times, it's like reach out, make contact with friends, speak to your GP if you need to. I know they're sometimes a bit elusive, and I'm laughing as I say that because I know with my GP you need to have limbs hanging off before you can get an appointment. But
Absolutely.
make the call to them, and look at what supports might be available.
Yeah,
Yeah, because there are people out there that care and do want to help.
they do. And you know, I make that offer to anybody. Sometimes that surface level connection is easier to speak to than it is with somebody who knows you really well
Yeah.
because you maybe just want to verbally process in that moment. So my email and is always open for people who want to do that.
I was going to ask that normally at the end of episodes. I would ask you that question of like if people did want to get in touch. So, yeah, how would people contact you, Kat, if today's conversations really resonated for them and they maybe want to reach out?
Yeah, so I do have a website. So it's katpatterson.com. Cat with a C and Patterson with one T. And actually, I mentioned the ominous positivity, so there's a blog on that
Amazing.
website that maybe kind of gives you a little bit more if that's something you're interested in reading about. That kind of tension between those two lovely words. Ominous always sounds a bit scary to people, but it's
Mm.
not. It's just about we don't need to be brave. We don't need to wear, or pull up our big pants and like brave it. We don't. It's okay to be a wee bit vulnerable and share that. So if people want to find me there, they can hop over there.
Amazing. And we'll share both of those in the show notes for today's session as well. So if people do want to get in contact, we'll get Kat's email address and website address into the show notes for people to make contact. Thank you, Kat, for this. It's been really powerful, and I don't doubt that it's going to help lots of people. For anybody that has been listening and found it useful, or if you've got somebody in mind that you think might benefit from it, then by all means, please do share the episode and make sure that you subscribe, because that way you'll get notifications of any other episodes that are released. The plan going forward is that we're going to release one episode each month. So yeah, just keep in contact in terms of the release schedules for them. The last thing I just want to finish by saying is that if you do want to connect with me, as I say, I'm on Instagram and Facebook, and both of those are at Continuum Counselling, and my website is www.continuumcounselling.com. Rolls off the tongue. But yes, thank you again, Kat, for today's episode, and I look forward to hearing from you and seeing where these conversations go.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kat.